Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this week's seminar, in person and virtual. I'm Andy Miller. As most of you know, I manage the seminar for the department. And I just wanted to, before we get started, tell you about next week's seminar, which I'm very excited about. It's being presented by a couple of colleagues of mine who are affiliated with the Chesapeake Bay Program Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee. And the title is Comprehensive Evaluation of Chesapeake Bay Response to Water Quality Efforts, Gaps, Uncertainties, and Policy Implications. This is actually the culmination of a 4-year effort by the Scientific and Technical Advisory Committee to provide feedback to the whole Chesapeake Bay program and all the watershed partners, all the states and the District of Columbia, about what has worked and what has not worked in the multi-decade Chesapeake Bay restoration effort, and recommending what opportunities we might pursue for after 2025, the next reevaluation of the Bay program's efforts. And Denise Wardrop, who is Executive Director of the Chesapeake Research Consortium, will be here in person with us on next Wednesday, and Kurt Stevenson, who is professor at Virginia Tech. I didn't ask him to do the 12-hour round trip from Virginia Tech, so he'll be participating virtually. And we're going to be actually over in ILSB 101 for those who are here in person. This will actually be kind of the first event in kicking off the 50th anniversary celebration for the department. There'll be other events going on next week, so we really want to invite people to participate in that. So I'm going to stop sharing screen. I'm going to invite Felipe Saad to introduce our distinguished speaker today, and then we will take it away, and Charles will guide you through his topic. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to introduce Dr. Charles Ichoku. He's a professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Systems at UMBC and director of the GESTAR, a research consortium between UMBC, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, and multiple other universities and organizations. Dr. Ichoku came to GESTAR from concurrent roles as professor of Earth and Environmental Systems at Howard University, as distinguished scientist of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, Cooperative Sciences Center in Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology. Prior to that, he served at NASA Goddard Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland for 20 years in various research and management roles. He earned his PhD in Earth Science from the Pierre and Marie Curie University in Paris, France, after earning his both master's in remote sensing and bachelor degree in surveying from the University of Nigeria, Enugu campus. Dr. Ichoku research program focuses on applying remote sensing, collecting data from a significant distance, most often from satellites orbiting Earth, in order to study large. Huh? Oh no problem. To study large scales that affect environmental land, weather, and air quality. His work is influenced by his youth in West Africa and focuses on phenomena that especially affect that region. For example, frequenting agricultural fires send various particles into the atmosphere, which can affect air quality, precipitation, and more. A few years ago, Ichoku joined with colleagues to initiate the U.S. West African Coastal Resilience Research Consortium. And in addition, he recently played an important role in the inauguration of the African Meteorological Society, where he serves as chair of a Diaspora of Friends of Africa committee. The committee involves a significant number of colleagues who are similarly passionate about the advancement of scientific research and applications in Africa, including GESTAR-2 inaugural directors, Belay Moss, whose research is similar, inspired by experience with drought displacement and resulting conflict during his youth in West Africa.
Charles, the floor is yours. You do need to share screen again, because that's good for us in the room, but we can't see it online.
All right. I'll do that. Let's see. Share screen. I have to find WebEx. Okay, I think I can share screen now. Share my entire screen. There are two screens. Which one should I share now? Yeah, I can share this one. Can you see it?
That's presenter view. We can see what's coming up as well as the current slide.
Okay, so let me change it. Share screen again. Stop. Share. Okay, screen 2. Can you see just what's on the screen? Okay. Very good. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, people in the room, as well as people that are connected online. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for that very nice introduction. I am new here at UMBC, but I like it very much. I enjoy this university and the department that I'm affiliated with, Geography and Environmental Systems. So today we're going to be talking about the Lake Chad, which is a lake in the center of Africa. If you see the map that I have on the screen here, you will see the location. I don't know if you've seen my cursor on the screen. Maybe not. I don't think so. How then do I make you see it?
Move it around. Let's see. Yeah, now.
Can you see? Okay, you can see it. So it's right smack in the middle of the center of Africa, more or less. So in 1968, from Apollo 7, you can see the image of Lake Chad. It is full. The water is filled up. So if you can estimate the dimensions here, it's about 100 kilometers by 200 kilometers. So fast forward to 2015, you can see that it's almost dry. There is some water here that you don't see very well, but this is from the ISS, International Space Station. So why is Lake Chad important? There are more than 30 million people living in that area who depend on the lake and the tributaries for water supply and for their overall livelihood. So, but let me go up and recognize some of the people who have contributed to this talk. So that includes Churchill Okonkwo, Jejong Lee, Fritz Policelli at Goddard, Scott Lutz at Goddard, Brian Kilo, Amin Desfuli also at Goddard, Francois Engelbrecht, Jimmy Adegoke, Sharon Burkett at Goddard, and Forrest Black. So all of these people, you'll see some of their contributions as we go along. So why don't we move ahead? So this is where Landsat, let me see, okay. So Landsat has a kind of recorded, the first one here is not Landsat, it was in 1963, you will see that Lake Chad was full of water. And then as we go along, you will see in 1973, the water was already decreasing. And then by the 80s, you will see that the northern basin is already almost completely dry, and it has not recovered even to this day. And that has resulted in a lot of conflict and a lot of problems in that basin. And some of you may have heard about the issues with terrorism and all those Boko Haram and so on that's going on in that region. And that's partly because of the way that this lake dried up and, putting people in severe difficulties. So this is another set of imagery from Landsat also, the series of Landsat. These are false color image where vegetation is in red. You'll see in the 70s, there was still some water, and then late 70s, water has decreased significantly, and they're replaced by vegetation inside the lake where water should be. You have vegetation. So the outline of this talk will be, we'll look at the Sahel drought, because Lake Chad is located in the Sahel of Africa, and how it is related to Lake Chad Basin and the drying of the lake. We'll look at the water resources over the last 100 years or so. Then we'll see how we are using satellite data to study the lake in this satellite era. And part of some of the variables we'll be looking at include rainfall, evapotranspiration, the surface area, the lake level, and land cover, land use, and groundwater. And we'll attempt to predict what will happen to the lake in the future, and then look at what the people who manage the lake need for sustainable management. And then we'll summarize. So I like to show this map because this is a publication published in the New Scientist in 2002. That was what what I saw here gave me the motivation to start doing my research, focusing my research in Africa. So you will see that this during the pre-industrial era, the rain band, the band where rainfall occurs, covers Lake Chad and goes beyond even into the Sahara area. But then in the 1980s, you'll see that the rain has a narrow here margin of the rain band. Look at what is written here that kind of piqued my interest is that while we are debating about droughts and so on and how it affects the region, during the worst years in the 70s and the 80s, up to 1 million people starved to death. So that kind of made me, here I am at NASA. I was at NASA Goddard at the time. And I thought, I have all these resources. Maybe I can do something. I don't know. I'm not rich. I don't have money or anything, but there is something I could definitely do. So I called a few people. We wrote a proposal, submitted under the IDS program. And fortunately, we were selected. And we did conducted research across that region for a period of about 6 years. So one of the studies we conducted was to look at the rain patterns, the climatology of rainfall. So this is a paper. So many of the slides I'll show the reference, the publication reference at the bottom here. So so this was developed by Amin Desfouli and myself, looking at the precipitation data set to characterize how rainfall happens in that region. So essentially, if you look here, you will see the reddish areas are dry areas, and the bluish, greenish, yellowish area has some rain. So if you look at the position of Lake Chad, you will see that there is no rain there except during June to September. Even then, it's only at the margin of the rain band. So there is not enough water flowing into the lake. I mean, flowing into the lake because it depends naturally on the rainfall patterns in the region. So this is another study that I wasn't involved in, published in 2001 by Dai et al., showing the overall global trends in temperature and precipitation. So the top one is temperature. So it's very obvious from the top map that it's warming globally in general over the last 50, 60 years and continuing even to this day. And the lower one is precipitation pattern. You will see that in this region that we were interested in, it is dry. The trend is going down over that period. So we looked at, this is another article published in the Earth Observatory showing, just looking at a certain period of time during the rainy season, June. And we see that during the rainy season, it is drier than it should be. No. Given in 2009 relative to.
Should we get Bob?
I'm having trouble thinking. I don't know what 5.
Bob. Boss side up.
Please mute yourselves unless you are speaking to me. Anyway, once if they are speaking, they're not listening. So
Phone.
Sure, go ahead.
So that's
But I
right.
think I think
All right, I have to find it. I'm not muted? Okay, very good. Can you still hear me across the internet?
yes.
Oh,
Yep.
very good. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so so you see the trend has been drying. There's been a drying trend in that whole thing. So let's look at the situation of Lake Chad, the basin itself, the Lake Chad Basin. You'll see these are the limits of the basin. You'll see mountains all surrounding Lake Chad. So it's an endorheic lake, which is surrounded by mountains. So which means that the water in the lake does not flow out to anywhere else. So all the water that falls in the basin can collect into the lake. So that's an advantage. But it's also a disadvantage. Most of the basin is located in the dry area of the Sahel, where there's barely any rainfall. Okay, so so let's look at what has happened over the last 100 years or more. We'll see that this is an article that was produced in the Earth, was presented in the Earth Observatory. You'll see the lake rainfall around the lake, the anomalies in rainfall, how it was going since the 1900s to about 2010. You'll see that the lake level, the level of water in the lake, has been tracking the rainfall with a little bit of lag. Once rain is decreasing, the level of the lake is also decreasing. And lately, the rainfall had been increasing slowly, and then the lake also was increasing. So we looked at, in another article we published in 2015, led by Churchill Okonkwo, we looked at some other variables to see how they are related to rainfall and the level of the water in the lake. So some of the climate variables we looked at include ENSO and the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, AMO. And we looked at the different stages in segments, what's been going on, how the AMO and ENSO are related to rainfall, which is, of course, controls what happens to the level of the lake. And we see that essentially without trying to go through, some conclusion we came up from studying these relationships here is that the late 60s and the early 70s marked the turning point that is here, where there was a very, very dramatic decrease in precipitation, which was followed by a similar decrease in the level of the lake. And then essentially, when it is the cold phase of ENSO, there is more precipitation in the region. But when there is a warm phase of the AMO, there is more precipitation in the region. So cold phase of ENSO, warm phase of AMO produces more precipitation. The reverse is the opposite. So so now we're now, even as we speak, in the warm phase of the AMO, and the Lake Chad is responding to this increase in precipitation because precipitation has been increasing during the warm phase of the AMO, and Lake Chad is also increasing, but not as significantly as we would like. So let's look at how people have been studying this during the satellite era. There's a set of satellite systems that have been observing inland water levels. This started in the early 90s, including Topex Poseidon, Jason 2, and so on and so forth. So you'll see that they are continuing from one system to the next. During this time, remember, this was after, they started after the lake, that dramatic drying of the lake because of the dramatic decrease in precipitation. It has not changed very much. There is a seasonal variation, as you see here. So, but the change has not been much, neither increasing nor decreasing. So it has remained at the same level over this whole period. A number of studies have gone into looking at changes in the surface area of the lake. And the problem with these studies are that different people consider different time periods. For instance, you'll see that this one looked at 1960s to 1980s. That was when the decrease was the most dramatic. And you see that it decreased, the area of the lake decreased by about 90%. This other study considered 1963 to 2001. That was when that gradient was very steep, and the decrease was about 99%. So depending on the period of time you consider as you study the lake, you will see a different decrease, different decrease levels. So another study considered only after that dramatic decrease, and found only 33% actually found an increase. So we ourselves, in a study led by Fritz Policelli, studied the lake we published in Remote Sensing. And we used two types of data. So on the one hand, the land surface temperature data from Moody's, as you see on the left here, and the European Space Agency Sentinel C-band radar data, as you see on the right here, to calculate how much water is in the lake. What is the area of the lake that contains water, even under the vegetation? So essentially, these two data sets gave similar results. But when you look at the different parts of the lake, the southern pool, there was a very good agreement between the two methods of analyzing the lake water surface area. Whereas in the northern pool, this area, where there is barely any water that we can see with our own eyes, but there is water under the vegetation, there is a very large disagreement. So we looked at this. There is a tool that is provided by the European Union, a joint research center, where you can look at various water bodies around the world and analyze what's going on with that. So if you look at this, we'll look at this period of 1984 to 2015. And you can do that. You can go online and use this tool to look at any water body you want. And we see this is water occurrence. So what this is showing is over this time period, what parts of the lake has water always or sometimes. So this small pool of water here, there's always water because you can see it. You see it with the eyes. But here, the rest of the lake where there should be water always, there is water sometimes over this period. And this has been since the dramatic decrease of precipitation in the lake level. Now, how intense is the change in water occurrence? That's what this right image is showing. So it shows that where we have the water, it is decreasing. Even the water that's contained in the lake now is decreasing. There is some increase when, sometimes because rainy season goes up and down, sometimes when there is heavy rain, it can increase. There have been events when, occasions when there is flooding in that region. So you have a lot of increase. So, but this is very temporary. So the danger is that where we have the water, it is always decreasing. So as I was preparing for this presentation, I went to get the updated data from this tool. And it is fairly consistent, but you will see that, well, there is always water in this blue area where the little pool still remains. But then sometimes there is water in other places. And we see that compared to these other areas, these areas say nothing. So which means that, the percentage of areas where there is water from time to time is decreasing. This one is also consistent, but you see areas where there is some increase, including times when they're heavy flooding, show that there are times when there is some increase compared to 1984. We also analyzed from the MERA2 data sets, we looked at rainfall compared to evaporation. And you see that evaporation is tracking the rainfall. There is significant evaporation in that water area, in the area that contains water in Lake Chad, because it's a very, very hot area, always dry and hot. So we estimated that about 74% of the seasonal June to September precipitation evaporates during the period we looked at. I did not get a chance to go back and look at the more recent period, but it seems to be consistent throughout the period. What about the groundwater, the water under the ground? There was a study conducted and published in 2012 by the British Geological Surveys showing the amount of water under the ground in various parts of Africa. And you see, if you look carefully, you will see the location of Lake Chad here. It's surrounded by areas where the groundwater seems to contain a significant amount of water. So I understand that Lake Chad has three different levels of groundwater. And so the area around Lake Chad contains water. but which actually helps to sustain the level of the lake as it is now. But it will cost a lot of money to exploit that water, to go deep down and dig out the water and use it. And doing that will not provide the type of water that people are already accustomed to for their activities, fishing and other things that they do, transportation and other economic activities they do in that region. So another study, this is provided by Scott, using the GRACE satellite system that uses gravity differences to look at water storage capacity, shows that yes, there is a seasonal variation in the levels of the lake, of the groundwater of the entire, because this is the storage, water storage that includes the surface water and the groundwater, and it has remained more or less level. It has not been going up or going down over time. Okay, so something else that had not been looked at before we started our study was what is the role of the biomass burning in that region in the on the water cycle. So this, for instance, an image from VIIRS, NPP VIIRS, showing all of the red dots you see here are individual pixels detected as containing fires in that region during one overpass of the satellite. So there is significant burning during the dry season. This is the dry season, this is January. So the dry season in that region, as you remember from our map, what we showed about the rainfall cycle is from about November to March. And so during that period, there's a lot of burning for agriculture, for clearing vegetation and other things. So we tried to look at what's going on. Anyway, this is just to show that I traveled to that area, to the Lake Chad Basin area in 2015. I took this picture of just to illustrate what's going on the ground relative to what we see from satellite. So in the basin, in the area that had water previously, that have no water now, people burn there to cultivate and get something to irrigate and try to plant. So I'm showing this to show around Lake Chad, as you can see Lake Chad here, you can see the Borderley Depression where dust is lifted off of this region, the kind of dust plumes that travel across the Atlantic is lifted from here. So this area burning continues, and areas that used to have vegetation, some of them have been burned out and they become sources of dust also here. So the deduction I'm making from there is that fires will lead to bare soil. When you have bare soil, then you can produce dust. And with more dust being produced from the same area, you lead to desertification. And soil moisture sometimes, and in this region in particular, can be coupled to the potential for precipitation. So when you have desertification, no soil moisture, of course, the tendency, the potential for rain to develop and fall will decrease. So we looked at the relationship between the burning, the fires, in that entire region with some of what we called the water cycle indicators. So in this case, we included precipitation, soil moisture, NDVI, which is the greenness of vegetation, and evapotranspiration, that's evaporation from land and from vegetation. So to study this, we kind of divided this region into several blocks. As you see here, northwest, north central, northeast, midwest, mid central, mideast, south central, southeast. And we correlated the annual change in these water cycle indicators relative to burning. But we made it in such a way that these other parameters, because each of them has an annual seasonal cycle. So we made it in such a way that the change that we try to correlate with the burning will occur after the season of the burning, so that the impact will be will be highlighted. So what you see here is that basically when you burn along this throughout the year, the next season, the correlation with precipitation, with the water cycle indicators will be negative, which means the more you burn, the less water you generate the next season, okay? Well, in this region, which is a kind of a more humid regions, there is some kind of confusion, okay? So, but then we decided to, basically look at the dry season, the dry season months. So during the dry season, there is still residual precipitation. So when we look specifically during the dry season to correlate, we saw that all of these regions where it is more humid, there is negative correlation with burning. So there is some relationship because it's not obvious to compare burning to precipitation. They occur at two distinct different seasons. So you cannot say, well, does smoke go up and affect the clouds and then modify the clouds to, how do you say, suppress precipitation? We cannot do that in this region because they are two different. But then we could look at what, if you burn now, the impact that is in the memory of the area that you've burned, how does that translate to what in the water cycle? So again, we conducted another study where we focused this analysis on the Lake Chad Basin. But because it's only this southern part of the Lake Chad Basin that actually has measurable precipitation, we focused in this Chari Lagone system of river system that supplies about 95% of the water that goes to Lake Chad. So you will see whether we looked at, and in this case, we looked at the evapotranspiration, but also precipitation, and then we looked at runoff and recharge. So whether we look at the full year cycle or we look at the dry season or wet season, we saw negative correlation. So which means you burn, you get less water. That's the that's the thing. And this was published here in the journal Earth last 2 years ago. Sure. Yeah, we looked at the fire detections anywhere. Yes. So because it's a lot of small fires everywhere. So it's not like big fires like we get here in California or something. So and it happens every year. So we are looking at attempting to say, okay, so what's going to happen to this lake? People are already suffering, and the lake has dried and it's not improving. There's a slight increase in precipitation, but that doesn't mean it will last a very long time. So what's going to happen to this? So in this publication here, we looked at, first of all, what is the baseline of precipitation? The average climatology from 1961 to 1990, which covers the period during which decrease occurred. We'll see Lake Chad is located right here at the margin between the dry area and the humid area. And if you look carefully, you will see that the rainfall around Chad is something on the order of 300 millimeters a year. So now the projection from from 6 GCMs show that this whole region will dry. The region will get wetter at the end of the century that we are in now. Now, you may say, yes, the region that contains Lake Chad will have an increase in precipitation by the end of the century. But look what you see here. So you already have like 300 millimeters. So the increase is something like 10%. 10% of the current. So going from 300 millimeters to 330 millimeters is almost insignificant. So that's the challenge we have. So another thing we consider is that, remember that we said that the warm phase of AMO, drives increase in precipitation in that region. So we're still enjoying the warm phase. That's why we have the increase in precipitation a little bit. What if it goes down in the next decade or so? So what happens? Are we still going to have this type of dramatic decrease in rainfall as we did? If that happens, the remaining little thing there, the little pool of water there, will disappear completely. So that's the fear that we have now. So how do you handle this? How do you deal with all this? So we thought about what shall we do? We wrote a proposal to, first of all, that you have water there, you still have some water there, there are people there. You need a good management system to be able to know how to allocate the water resources to the populations that live in that region. So some of the parameters we think we need to be looking at in that region are parameters that are for short-term dynamics, interannual, and decade to century, and we have a list of several of them here. But then, during the time we were conducting the study, we couldn't find ground-based measurements to use to validate and interpret some of the analysis we were doing from satellite and from models. So we had to go there and install some ground-based measurements, very limited ground-based measurement. It was not in our budget in our proposal, but we had to take some of it, take some of the money we had and went there and purchased some automated weather stations, about 6 of them, and went there and installed weather stations, soil moisture probes, and some groundwater meters. So the weather stations that we installed in 2015, they were producing data for a while. I don't know whether they're still working now. I've not kept in contact because the project ended a long time ago. And so the day we installed it, if you see this picture, it was a very big deal. The press from Chad, we were in Chad, they came and interviewed us and put us on TV. You know, this is the first automated weather station being installed in the entire Central Africa. So, well, I don't know whether more have been installed after we finished the project and left. But anyway, that's what we did. So why did we do that? Why did we think that we needed ground-based measurements? Because we used the measurements to initialize and parameterize some of the models we use. We use it to quantify, to monitor and quantify the Lake Chad Basin water balance. And we can use it to understand the water cycle processes in the Lake Chad Basin and its interactions and feedbacks from other processes that happen there. And then we can use what we learned from there to extend to the larger region, to the Sahel and the other parts of that region. And we can use the measurements to validate data analysis and modeling that we're doing. That was the intent we had when we went to install those measurements. And we were hoping to have more resources to install even more, but it didn't work out that way. In any case, the work we were doing, we were not doing it in isolation. We went and contacted the organization that manages Lake Chad. It's called the Lake Chad Basin Commission. It's an international organization that is constituted by the countries that Lake Chad, the whole basin intersects. So there are 8 countries. So we went there and worked with them, and they helped us to actually, because the terrain was kind of hostile. It was not easy. Actually, when for 3 years, I was asking for authorization to be allowed to travel there. It was not approved until after 3 years in 2015, it was approved. When we went there, NASA asked me, you cannot go out of N'Djamena, the capital city. It was dangerous, you know, the problem is still happening there. So we had to work with this organization who had their scientists here and some other people help us to actually go to the field and install those few instruments. So in any case, we also invited them here. This is the lead of that organization and his 2 colleagues that he brought with him. So we brought them here. This was at Goddard. The reason we had them come, we had this was to discuss how do we then we have already installed a few of these measurements. How do we expand that? And then how do we develop a comprehensive water management system to move forward? So we have this meeting with them. And we actually developed a proposal to provide them a comprehensive water management system. So we jointly developed with them, so that's a good way to work with people, the people on the ground. We go there, we talk with them, we bring ideas together, and then we build a proposal. Of course, the proposal was not selected, but this is just to show the system they were using, which they still use to this day, and what we had proposed to implement for them. So hopefully one day we'll resubmit this proposal, and hopefully it will be funded, and then we can do more. In any case, in 2018, they had a very big international conference on Lake Chad in Abuja, Nigeria. So I was invited to come and talk about the work that we've been doing. So just to summarize, what they have decided that will be the best solution to implementing Lake Chad to ensure that that lake does not disappear completely is to tap one of the branches of the Congo River, the Ubangi River, and send it across about 1,000 kilometers to Lake Chad. So that is it. It will cost at least 50 billion US dollars. So they're still looking for the money to do that. So during this summer, when we were summarizing our scientific discussions, we had the conference for about 3 days. And then the fourth day, the leaders, the presidents and prime ministers of 6 of those countries came there, and we were summarizing the information for them. You can see them sitting in front row of the, and I took out my phone here and took a picture right there. I had never seen a president in front of me ever before. So here I had 6 in front of me, so I couldn't miss this opportunity to take this picture. So we, they're still working on that. A year later, there was a follow-up meeting at the United Nations here in New York. I was also invited, and I went there and shared what we have been doing. And, so this solution that they're proposing, frankly, I support this proposal, but it will cost a lot of money, to save, after all, the Congo River is already flowing into the ocean. So why not tap a little bit of it and save it? So tapping it will be about 5% of what's being discharged into the ocean, and save it in the Lake Chad Basin, and that will hydrate that whole basin and keep things alive again. So in summary, just take-home messages. The location of the Lake Chad Basin in the Sahel makes it vulnerable to both regional climate and local human activity. Changes in the Lake Chad Basin's water resources are strongly influenced by precipitation and evaporation. A variety of satellite data are being used to study it, but to really continue and ensure the sustainability of the lake, we need a ground-based scientific measurement networks to support all the studies that are going on, and a very comprehensive water management system. So that's it, and I acknowledge support for the studies we conducted from NASA and from other collaborators here in the United States and in the West African region, West and Central African region, and even Southern Africa. Okay, thank you. That's it from me.
Thanks, Charles. I think what we're going to do, we will welcome people to submit questions, actually indicate in the chat that they want to ask questions, but we'll start with people. So, and I'll remind everybody that you have to speak loudly because it has to be picked up by the computer in the front of the room. This speaker doesn't seem to be, so.
And I can repeat the question when you ask. Yeah.
So, in the room, who's got a question? Then we'll go to
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, so is the Congo River diversion, is that what's the project? Is that the same?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's also called Transaqua. Well, they were thinking about developing a canal, that may require building a power station to pump the water somehow. And then at some stage, the natural channels, you see the Cherry Laguna River system will carry it naturally into Lake Chad. And along the way, they plan to put some hydroelectrical power stations that will provide power for different things, and even solar power along the way. So they have a very good, elaborate plan to do that. There has been feasibility studies in the past by Canadians and Italians, and now I think the Italian government also, I think, donated like 1.5 million for another more detailed feasibility studies to be conducted. So I don't know where they are, and I think that the United Nations Secretary General is supportive of the idea, and I believe I heard that he planned to help to see whether they can generate the funding, but thus far I don't know how far they have gone. Yeah, Lorraine. Yes, so the question here, that's a very good question. Lorraine was asking if 74% of the precipitation evaporates. So what about the remaining 25%? So I don't know for sure, but I believe that the 25% is used in general for domestic uses and others, irrigation and other things of that nature. And also some of it goes to recharge the aquifer. So that's probably why it has not dried out completely, because there is still groundwater that comes back to to the rivers, to the lake.
As I recall, your slide said 74% evaporates during the rainy season.
That's correct.
So
Yes.
that's only in 3 months.
Because that's when we looked. That's when we looked at the rainy season only, and so the precipitation and the evaporation during the same time. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much, Professor. South Sudan. No problem. Sud is part of the Big Five. And take Sud as a ecosystem region. Talking about Lake Chad, and I think we are the same region that also been Sud. So I'm trying to ask if the diversion of the Nile water Sud going to affect amount of rain, sea. Just asking without knowledge from geography, I'm not a geography person. Here, studying entrepreneurship and also like community leadership. Point here is we have a concern of displacement, people that are living along the Nile, people in terms of due to the climate change, massive displacement because of the flooding. Now, the Egyptians are seeing it as an opportunity to divert the water when people are displaced. But there's a debate going on from people like us who are concerned about our water. But we don't need the water to go, but we need solutions to be provided on how people can live water. So when I came here last year, I wrote a project about my placemaking class. Basically just an idea that can help people live with water, considering recreation like parks, public parks, farms, or stored water. So are there, the second question, are there people studying the crisis of the soup that you know? Or if there are no people, how can I use the time here to connect with those people and see those studies are made?
Okay, thank you for the question. So if you didn't hear from WebEx, the question concerns the Sud, which is a river system in southern Sudan that's being considered to be diverted into the Nile to go down to Egypt. Is that the question? So you're asking if there are people who are studying that problem. We ourselves did not study that problem, and I think it's not the same kind of scenario that we are considering for Lake Chad and the Congo Basin. Here, we're not talking about diverting the Congo Basin. We're talking about just tapping a little bit of the water from it to put water into Lake Chad. Because there are a lot of people. If you heard me say in the beginning, there are about 30 million people that depend on Lake Chad. And there have been disturbances there for a long time. And it increased since the droughts of the 60s and the 70s, where people were displaced. You can imagine people living here that depend on the water that's like 1 mile away from them, where they can walk to. And then now this water has receded like 10 miles away, and they don't have cars to go and get water or to do anything or to even survive. So this is a different situation. I think that this is the one we're talking about from the Congo, Ubangi River along the Congo, to take a little bit of it, 5% of it, to send to Lake Chad will be more advantageous than anything. And it has to be done responsibly. It's not something that they will just dig a channel and let water flow uncontrolled. If they do it very responsibly, it will be a win-win for everybody. Because now, if you keep your water, let's assume that Congo Basin keeps its water, and then it doesn't keep the water, actually, the whole water flows into the Atlantic. So the threat of drought and dryness will keep approaching, and people are burning and cutting some of the forest in the Congo Basin. And if you do not try to hydrate the upstream of where the dryness is coming from, eventually the dryness will catch up with the Congo system. So it's a win-win for everybody for that water to be. That's my opinion. I don't know. It's not a general, but that's what they decided to do, and I agree with that. So I'm sorry, I don't know people who are working on the suit, but maybe somebody here. Does anybody know anybody who's working on the suit system from Southern Sudan that connects to the Nile? Yeah, eventually we'll talk about it, and maybe we'll find people who do. Yeah. All right.
So we have a request for you to stop sharing screen so people can see you.
Okay. Sure.
There are a bunch of questions online, so we'll try to see if we can get through as many of those as possible.
Okay.
I'm going to read one which came from Matt Fagan because he can't stay on. And we'll ask people who are online to report it. So his questions were, what are the past and projected human use for water for Lake Chad? And are there endemic aquatic species for Lake Chad that would be threatened by the river diversion plan? You know the answer to either of those?
Well, let's for when we say diversion, it's not diversion. We're not diverting the river. It's taking a little bit of it to flow into Lake Chad. If there is very detailed study, feasibility, and other, including all the potential consequences, I think that project can be handled very well. I don't see anything in the Congo Basin that will kill something in the adjoining basin. It's a natural forest ecosystem. It can only, maybe if the channel is going here, maybe it will affect the banks of the channel, but not to destroy anything. But of course, the very detailed studies will provide whatever precautions that need to be taken in the implementation of the project if it eventually goes into that. I think that's all I can respond to. Yes.
Thanks. I'm going to go ahead and ask, Ali, you had a simple question. I think it may have already been answered. Is that correct? Because I think Dylan answered also about how they get the water from the Congo. Did you want to speak to that or not?
No, that's fine. Yeah, the question has been mostly answered. Yes, that's fine. You can move the next one.
Okay, Gloria Chuku had a question.
Yes.
Do you want to unmute and ask it, or do you want me to
Okay,
just
do
read
you
it?
want me to read the question?
Yeah, please go ahead. I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing the questions in front of me.
Okay,
Yeah.
Directly.
I wrote, thank you for this important talk. Instead of the Congo River, why not rivers Chari and Logene that already supply 95% water to the lake?
Because there is not enough from these rivers. The rivers already supply, and the rivers can only get the water, the rain that falls within that basin. Both rivers are within the Lake Chad Basin. And you can see only that very small sub-basin area receives rain. So they already supply everything they have, and it's enough. So they are needs to coming at. In any case, the water that will be tapped eventually from the Congo River will flow through and to get into Lake Chad, because they will not dig the channel all the way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. The next question, anything else to say?
No, no.
One of our graduate majors has a question. Oh, if you're still on, you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, absolutely. So my question was, I've seen in some readings that some of the organic material from the Daily Depression, which is a Violet chart, contain nutrients that go to the Amazon forest in the form of dust. So when the lake happens to get refilled, how would this affect the how'd you put it? The
Dust emission from that bodily depression.
Right. The nutrients, would it affect the nutrients that the Amazon forest receive in a negative way, or would it
No.
receive it in a more positive way?
No, because the lake we're talking about is a small part of the entire basin. So the rest of the basin will still have the bodily depression from which dust will be lifted. So it will not affect it in any way. Well, at least not significantly.
All right, thank
Is
you.
that a good? Okay, good.
Okay, thanks. Dawn has a question. Dawn, are you still there?
Hi, I am. Thank you so much for this talk, Charles. It was really interesting to hear. There were a lot of things that I felt like I could ask questions about, but one that I was particularly curious about was the agricultural burning that you mentioned as one influence on declining precipitation. And I'm interested, I noticed that there were some parts of the talk where you talked about like a longer history going back to 1900 or so, but there wasn't as much talk about the history of the agricultural burning. And so I'm interested in, given that you're looking at the history of this lake and influences on it, I'm curious what's known about the history of the burning, of agricultural burning. Is it increasing, decreasing, stable, and what might account for any trends in the in agricultural burning? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So they study the same paper where I brought that that picture where we showed the impact of burning on the water cycle. Also, we had another component, another aspect of it within that same paper, talking about the conversion from savanna and wetland to cropland. So more of the over the last 20 years or so, when we have had satellite data available to see. Prior to that, we couldn't see the burning because there were no suitable data from satellite to see. So now that we see it, we're able to analyze and see that there has been conversion of savanna and wetland to cropland, a lot of conversion. So, and that also agrees with the population increases because there are more people they need to feed, and that's their way of their agricultural practice is to burn the residue and also to clear the land before they cultivate. So that hasn't changed very much. The cultural practice continues. The population has increased. And so more land is converted to cropland.
Okay, we
Thank
have
you.
one more question. Yeah, can you hear me? You want to ask a question?
Hi, Charles. This is a very interesting talk. My question is, like, when I read about in China, they plant lots of trees to help, release dryness. But in some area, planting tree because the tree will actually requires a lot of water to grow. So I wonder if there's any study, for people try to increasing or vegetation by planting tree type of practice in that area. So will that be, help release the dryness or actually
Yes,
will take more water?
yes, that will help to a certain extent. By the way, I heard there was a program about greening the Sahel, which involved tree planting. They planted a lot of trees for a while. And I have not followed that project to see what stage it is at now, but I think it started about 10 years ago. But, and then of course they plant the trees that are resilient to dryness. But they are resilient to dryness, but as long as you don't have enough water to actually keep the water there for people to use, it helps a little bit, but it doesn't solve the full problem. So the problem needs water, needs really massive water supply. And after a while, maybe the microclimate will change. And then because of trees being there and protecting water from evaporation and so on, the soil moisture will help sustain the water cycle there. And over time, maybe rainfall will increase. But tree planting is a great idea. And it has already, some people have actually done it. But I'm sorry, I don't have the right up-to-date information about it.
Thank you.
Hey, Shay, and with that question, I think we will thank Charles for a really interesting presentation. For any, well, I will stop the recording now.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Bye-bye now.
For anyone who actually, let me